10,000 years. That's how long humanity has prayed to a corpse. They've bled the stars dry for it, burned worlds to ash in its honor, and whispered its name like salvation. But all gods rot eventually. The Imperium was built on a lie so vast that truth itself became heresy. And now, after 10 millennia of silence, the lie begins to breathe. The golden throne hums. Not the mechanical thrum the priests know. This is something deeper, older. The light shifts from gold to a sickly white. The tech priests of Mars freeze mid-chant, their mechanical voices stuttering in disbelief. The sacred readings, constant for 10,000 years, spike into impossible values. The Emperor, the corpse, stirs. Every conduit in the sanctum trembles. Every servo skull flickers. The air thickens until it feels alive, charged with static and ancient sorrow. Somewhere within the palace alarms scream. Yet in the throne room no one moves. The assembled attendants, custodians, mechanicus adepts, high lords, stand transfixed. They see the light behind the Emperor's ruined eyes flare once, and the impossible happens. He opens them. At first, the gathered sons think it's another hallucination, but no machine can fake what follows. The sound that crawls from the throne is not the resonance of metal but breath. Ragged, strained, unmistakably human. The Primarchs feel it before they hear it. Guilliman stiffens. Dorn's massive hand tightens on his weapon hilt. Perturabo's eyes narrow, calculating every vibration of the sound. They were summoned without explanation. An emergency convocation, no details, no context. Some of them haven't set foot on Terra in centuries. Others had vowed never to return. Yet here they stand, the Emperor's greatest creations, staring up at what they once believed was a god. The first words are soft, hoarse. I have lied to you. The sentence rips through reality like a blade. The throne amplifies it. Every vox, every psychic relay, every flicker of the Astronomicon pulses with the sound. Across the galaxy, astropaths collapse, hearing it echo inside their skulls. I have lied to you all. I have lied to myself. Guilliman's breath catches. 10,000 years of doctrine, calculation, strategy, all built on this man's perfection. His mind, sharper than any blade, begins to unravel the implications in a dozen directions. If the Emperor lied, then everything, every law, every war, every sacrifice, stands on nothing. Dorn doesn't move. His belief is too absolute to comprehend betrayal. He is duty carved into flesh, faith made stone. But now that stone is cracking. His knuckles whiten around his weapon until metal groans under his grip. Perturabo lowers his head slightly, eyes darting as if reading invisible equations. His genius demands reason, but reason fails before the absurdity of a god admitting deceit. The universe becomes an unsolvable formula. The Emperor's voice grows stronger, resonating through the chamber. I was never divine, I am not holy. I am a man, and I have been pretending to be more for longer than memory allows. I told you I was eternal because you needed me to be. I let you worship me because fear of the unknown would destroy you otherwise. But it was all a lie, every word. For a moment no one speaks. The air trembles with power and disbelief. Guilliman finally whispers, "You deceived an entire species." The Emperor's gaze turns to him, wary but unwavering. "I saved an entire species." Lies were the only language they understood. The revelation burns through the Astronomicon's light, carried by every psyker in the galaxy. Across billions of worlds, prayers falter mid-sentence. Priests choke on the words of their creeds. Children wake screaming from dreams of a god's voice confessing sin. Guilliman's logic flounders under the weight of that voice. Dorn feels something within him fracture, a lifetime of unbending faith snapping in an instant. Perturabo's mind reels as the Emperor continues. "You were all my instruments, my sons, yes, but also my weapons. I made each of you from fragments of myself, each one burdened by flaw. Angron, I gave you rage to keep you bound to violence. Curze, I wove darkness into your soul so you'd never stop fearing. Lorgar, I gave you faith so consuming that you would always need something to believe in. Every flaw ensured obedience. None of you were meant to be free. The silence that follows is unbearable." Guilliman's jaw locks. Dorn's breathing turns shallow. Perturabo's gaze becomes unreadable, but the light in his eyes flickers like dying code. Then the throne room doors shudder. The air changes. Angron enters. He moves like a storm-given flesh, his presence burning hot enough to warp reality. "You Lee." His voice cracks the walls. Machinery screams, lights explode. "You speak of truth now. Father, after everything, you're still lying." The Emperor's expression does not change. Perhaps. But this lie dies with me. Curze steps from shadow, pale and grinning, his madness thinly veiled by calm. So that's it. A god reveals he is human, and we are meant to be grateful. You admit you are afraid, and you expect absolution. He laughs, a hollow corpse sound that chills the air. You built the universe on fear, you fed on it, and now you drown in your own creation. Lorgar collapses to his knees. His whole life has been faith sculpted into scripture. Every word he ever preached burns to ash in his mind. Yet in the ruin of that faith, something else flickers: empathy. He looks up, eyes wet with grief. If you are only human, he whispers, then your sacrifice means more than any god's. The Emperor's gaze softens almost imperceptibly. I wanted humanity to stand alone, to build without gods, but they needed belief, so I gave them mine. I let them chain themselves to illusion because I feared what they'd become without it. I feared their freedom. Dorn steps forward. Then why now? His voice cracks the stillness. Why destroy it all? Why reveal this when the truth will collapse the Imperium? Because I am dying, the Emperor says quietly. The throne is failing. The priests patch it with ritual and ignorance, but I feel it decaying beneath me. I have months left, perhaps less, and I will not die a liar. Guilliman's voice is low, cold, analytical, but trembling. Then we have been slaves to your fear, all of us. The Emperor nods once. Yes, and I am ending that now. The Astronomicon flickers. Every psyker across the Imperium feels the pulse of something fading. The golden light that guided fleets for 10,000 years dims for the briefest instant, and entire sectors plunge into shadow. I built meaning for you, the Emperor says, his voice distant now. Now you must build your own. Angron's fury fades into something worse. His tone is ragged, empty. Then what was it all for? The wars, the blood, the sacrifice. If it was all built on a lie, what was the point? The point, says the Emperor, was the choice you made to believe. Even if it was false, your meaning was real. That is humanity's curse, and its gift. Perturabo's words are measured hollow. The Imperium will fracture. Faith held it together, not truth. Without it, we descend into chaos. Yes, the Emperor admits, and perhaps in that chaos something alive will grow. Lorgar raises his head. Then what are you, father? If not divine, what are you? I don't know, the Emperor says. I was once certain I was chosen. Now I know only this. I am old, afraid, and tired of pretending to be perfect. The light around him flickers again. The custodians shift uneasily. Guilliman sheaths his sword slowly. Then what is your final command? No command, the Emperor says. That is my last gift, freedom. You are no longer bound to my will. The throne crackles, sparks arsing across its surface. The light dims to a faint ember. None of the sons speak. They understand instinctively that this moment will never come again. The Emperor's eyes close. For the first time in 10,000 years he looks peaceful. They leave the chamber one by one. Guilliman's mind is already calculating outcomes. Sector collapses. Political implosions, the probability of civil war. Dorn moves like a dying machine, conviction shattered, purpose undefined. Perturabo walks in silence, equations forming and failing within his mind. Angron clenches his fists, trembling not from rage but from grief. Curze fades into shadow, smiling as if vindicated. And Lorgar prays not to a god but to humanity itself. Across the galaxy, the revelation spreads like wildfire. On shrine worlds, priests set themselves ablaze rather than face a universe without a god. In hive cities, mobs riot, tearing statues down, replacing them with empty plinths. On forge worlds, the Mechanicus fractures. Half declare the transmission a chaos trick. The rest whisper that the Omnissiah was never divine. Armies fracture. Fleets turn on each other. The light that held humanity together flickers, and the void grows hungry. Yet in that darkness, something begins to stir. The golden throne hums like a dying heart, each pulse weaker than the last. The air smells of ozone and old dust, of sanctified oil and something older still, decay. The Emperor's confession races through the warp, carried by the same psychic beacon that once guided fleets and souls alike. But now that light burns in reverse, spreading not faith but uncertainty. The Astronomicon flares, flickers, and every psyker who touches it feels the same impossible whisper: he lied. Worlds convulse. On distant shrine planets, saints bleed from their eyes as statues of the Emperor weep molten gold. In hive cities, billions drop to their knees in confusion, some praying harder, others clawing their faces bloody in denial. The ecclesiarchy collapses into civil war overnight. Cardinals denounce cardinals, accusing one another of heresy, each claiming that only their interpretation of the Great Confession is real. Some preach that the emperor's words were a test of faith, that true believers will ignore them. Others insist the revelation is divine, that only a god could confess imperfection and remain holy. On Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus fractures. Entire forges go dark as the tech priests argue whether the voice that spoke from Terra was truly the Omniscia or a heretical data. Echo sent to test their loyalty. Skitarii legions march against each other in crimson dust storms, their war hymns overlapping in distorted binary. What was once worship becomes warfare. What was once faith becomes infection. The cult Mechanicus burns itself clean, trying to preserve what cannot be preserved. The galaxy itself seems to shudder, as though the weight of 10,000 years of faith being broken has physical consequence. The warp stirs. Entities long silent turn their gaze toward Terra, drawn by the psychic rupture the confession has created. The chaos gods laugh, not because they won, but because the truth did. For the first time in millennia, they need do nothing. Humanity is tearing itself apart without their touch. Guilliman watches all of this unfold from his flagship above Terra. His mind is a machine of logic, processing millions of reports, casualty projections, and planetary data streams. Every model he runs predicts the same outcome: collapse. Yet amid the calculations, something human stirs. Grief. "I've spent 10,000 years building on sand," he mutters. "And now the tide has come in." His aides avoid his eyes. None dare speak. For once, the ultramarine Primarch has no plan that can save the Imperium. Dorn retreats into silence. In the shadowed vaults of the palace he builds walls, fortresses, monuments, not to protect Terra, but to give his hands purpose. He carves prayers into stone with tools that tremble in his grip. His faith is gone, but duty remains, hollow and heavy. When asked why he continues, he only says, "'Cause something must stand, even if it stands for nothing." Perturabo watches the disintegration with detached clarity. "Predictable," he murmurs. "Remove the lie, and the structure fails." The Emperor built civilization like a bridge of bone, beautiful, functional, but doomed to rot. He begins drafting designs for something new, a decentralized order of systems that might one day survive without gods. For the first time in centuries, his work feels meaningful, cold, logical, but meaningful. Angron wanders. He descends to the underhabs of Terra, unseen by custodians who pretend not to notice. The nails still scream in his skull, but their rhythm has changed, less fury, more ache. He sits among the desperate and the lost, listening to their confusion, their pain. "He was afraid," one man whispers. Angron laughs, a sound like grinding steel. "Then maybe he was one of us after all." Curze does not laugh. He vanishes into the night of the warp, trailing broken laughter that echoes across dead worlds. His philosophy, that life is meaningless, that all order is delusion, has been vindicated. Yet instead of triumph, he feels hollow. If the Emperor's divinity was a lie, then even his own madness loses purpose. What is darkness worth if the light was never real? He becomes a shadow of his former self, haunting ruined systems, killing not out of hatred but habit. Even Terra tastes empty now. Lorgar, meanwhile, does what none expect. He prays. His faith was shattered and reborn in the same breath. He no longer worships perfection. He worships the act of endurance itself. In the ashes of his broken theology, he finds a new gospel, one that says humanity's strength is not its purity, but its persistence. He begins to preach again, this time not to build an empire, but to teach survival without gods. His sermons spread like wildfire among those too wary to hate. Back on Terra, the High Lords are paralyzed. The Inquisition burns entire sectors to stop the confession's spread, but the words are already everywhere, in Vox echoes, in data archives, in the dreams of every soul touched by the Astronomicon. The Administratum tries to censor the truth by rewriting records, but history itself rebels. The people whisper, the soldiers hesitate, the priests falter. The machine of the Imperium begins to grind against itself. In the forges, the Mechanicus burns data that contradicts its creed. In the temples, cardinals execute heretics only to be executed themselves moments later. On countless worlds, governors declare independence, claiming the Emperor's final words freed them from Terra's tyranny. Others double down, declaring the confession false and swearing vengeance on those who repeat it. The Imperium fractures, not in a single war, but in 1,000 small implosions. Guilliman records a message and sends it through what remains of the Astronomicon. Hold fast. Order endures. But even he doesn't believe it. His words reach some worlds too late, their cities already aflame, their faith already devoured by disbelief. Others receive it and kneel, mistaking his message for scripture. Guilliman's name becomes another idol in a galaxy starving for meaning. The Emperor's body weakens with every hour. The throne flickers like a candle in vacuum. The priests surrounding him continue their chants out of terror, not faith. They no longer understand what their god is. A man, a myth, a dying machine. Yet the rituals continue. Humanity has forgotten how to stop. Inside the throne room, silence reigns. The custodians for the first time bow not out of reverence, but mourning. They know what comes next. The Emperor's breaths grow shallow. Each exhale releases faint motes of golden dust that shimmer and vanish. He is fading, his body collapsing inward like a dying star. On a distant world, a child looks up at the night sky and whispers, "The light is dimmer tonight." Her mother hushes her, but both know she's right. The Astronomicon flickers again, weaker than before. Fleets drift off course. Warp storms bloom in its wake. The Emperor's final confession is tearing the veil between reality and madness apart. And yet, in the midst of collapse, something strange happens. On worlds where faith once ruled, people begin to talk, not of gods but of survival. In ruined cathedrals they gather not to worship but to remember. Farmers, soldiers, slaves, all speaking of the same thing. The Emperor was human, and if he was human, then so are they. For the first time, the Imperium feels the pulse of something it hasn't known in millennia: empathy. Lorgar's new creed spreads quietly. He calls it the doctrine of the flame, that the divine spark isn't in gods but in the will to endure the cold. His sermons speak of the Emperor not as a god, but as a man who bore the unbearable and finally chose honesty over power. For every world that burns in riot, another begins to heal, small and fragile but alive. But the Mechanicus does not forgive. On Mars, a schism becomes holy war. The faithful call themselves the Red Dominion, declaring that the confession was a trick of chaos meant to poison the machine, God's servants. Opposing them, the Reformists claim that the Emperor's humanity proves divinity is unnecessary, that technology and spirit can coexist without worship. Their conflict sets the red planet ablaze, its forges glowing brighter than its sun. Guilliman sends emissaries, but diplomacy fails. Perturabo warns him that logic cannot negotiate with faith. Guilliman knows he's right but cannot stop trying. "If I surrender to cynicism," he tells Perturabo, "then the Imperium dies in me before it dies in truth." Angron returns to the stars. For the first time, his rage feels directionless. The nails feed on fury, but there's no one left to blame. He drifts from war to war, fighting not for empire or revenge, but to drown the silence. Yet somewhere in that chaos, he begins to find a strange kind of purpose, protecting those who cannot protect themselves. He laughs bitterly at the irony. "I was made a weapon," he says to no one, "and now I choose where I strike." Curze is less fortunate. His visions of doom no longer make sense. If prophecy was shaped by divine will, and that will was a lie, then every nightmare he ever had becomes meaningless. He begins to hunt himself, seeking punishment for crimes that may not matter. His legend becomes ghostly, a wraith wandering dead systems, whispering sermons of despair to the void. On Terra, the Emperor fades further. Guilliman returns to the throne room one final time. The chamber is empty of priests. They've either fled or perished in terror. The Emperor's body glows faintly, like a coal losing its last heat. "Father," Guilliman says softly, "what happens now?" The eyelids flutter but do not open. The voice is a whisper. "Now you live without me." The throne's hum falters, then steadies one last time, as if taking a final breath. Guilliman bows his head not as a servant but as a son. "Then I will try." Outside, the stars shift. Across 10,000 worlds, the old faith burns away. Some choose war, others surrender, others build anew. The galaxy is bleeding, but not dead. The corpse, God, is gone, and yet humanity endures. The throne falls silent. No chant follows, no trumpet of celestial fanfare, no crack of divine thunder. Just silence, absolute, immense, and alive with meaning. It is the sound of 10,000 years ending. Guilliman stands before the husk that once anchored a civilization and feels something he cannot name. It is not grief, not quite, not relief either. It is the raw awareness of consequence, of a truth too vast to bear and too heavy to deny. Across Terra the shockwave of stillness spreads. The light of the Astronomicon flickers out completely for one breathless instant, and in that instant every navigator in the galaxy screams. The void itself seems to hold its breath. Then the light returns, dimmer, uncertain, no longer a beacon but a dying ember struggling to exist against eternity. Humanity feels the loss in its bones. They can sense it in their dreams, in the brief, chilling moment between one heartbeat and the next, when they wonder if perhaps there are no gods after all. On the hive world of Necromunda, a worker stops mid-prayer, staring at his hands as though they belong to someone else. In the libraries of Terra, adepts weep over texts they no longer understand. The ecclesiarchy tears itself apart. Half declare the confession blasphemy and the other half call it revelation. Priests who once preached certainty now whisper apologies. They burn their own icons and kneel before the empty air, unsure whether to beg forgiveness or offer it. Guilliman watches the transmissions come in, riots, revolts, suicides, awakenings. A billion reactions to one truth. His aides plead for action, but he hesitates. Every order feels false now, every command hollow. The Emperor's last words echo in his mind, no command. Freedom. Dorn cannot rest. He fills his days with the mechanical precision of construction. Fortress upon fortress, wall upon wall, as though he can build structure around meaning itself. He carves no aquillas now, only blank stone. When asked what therefore, he answers, to remind us that nothing is eternal. His hands bleed daily. He does not notice. Perturabo observes all of it with a detached calm that masks exhaustion. Collapse is the beginning of pattern. He mutters to his forge masters. Entropy births form. He draws new designs, architectures meant for worlds no longer united by godhood, systems of self-sustaining governance, decentralized, logical, resilient. It is the kind of order he had always dreamed of creating, stripped of the Emperor's mythology, and for the first time his genius feels unchained. Angron cannot build or plan or philosophize. He wanders through war zones like a ghost. When he fights now, it isn't to kill but to protect. The nails scream when he holds back, but he forces them into silence. On one ruined world he saves a group of civilians pinned beneath rubble. They cower when they see him, the monster of myth, but he just says, "You're free now," before vanishing into the smoke. His rage still burns, but now it has no master. It belongs to him. Curze drifts in the dark between stars, haunted by irony. The man who once saw only lies has lived long enough to witness the truth, and it leaves him with nothing. His laughter fades into whispers. Sometimes on derelict worlds, people say they hear him in their sleep, murmuring the same line over and over, "He was human." That's the cruelest truth of all. Lorgar, meanwhile, becomes something different entirely. His faith did not die, it transformed. He walks barefoot through the ash of broken cathedrals, preaching to no one and everyone. If our God was human, he tells those who will listen, then divinity lies within us. The Emperor's failure was thinking godhood meant perfection, but godhood is endurance. It is the will to go on despite despair. People begin to follow him, not because he commands it, but because he understands what they feel. The hollowness of losing a god, the terror of being free. On Mars, the war between the Red Dominion and the Reformists consumes continents. Plasma rivers burn through the crust. The machine priests scream their hymns in binary rage. Each side claims to serve truth, but both are blind. In the chaos, a third faction rises. A quiet order of tech adepts who reject both worship and rebellion. They work in silence, repairing systems, preserving data, keeping humanity's knowledge alive. No one remembers their names centuries later, but their work ensures that Mars, though scarred, does not die. The Inquisition fractures. Some declare the revelation a test, the Emperor's final examination of humanity's soul. Others accept it as reality and turn their zeal toward protecting humanity not for the Emperor, but from itself. A few vanish into the shadows, hunting anyone who speaks of the confession aloud. They become inquisitors of silence, murdering truth to preserve illusion. The Imperium's borders dissolve, systems go dark, warp storms bloom like bruises. The Emperor's confession becomes the most powerful contagion in the galaxy, spreading without ships, without sermons, carried only by the minds of those who dare to remember it. Yet amid collapse, new things are born. On one agri-world, a farmer lights a candle in a church stripped of all icons. He was afraid. He tells his daughter, "That means we're allowed to be too." She nods, not understanding, but remembers the light. Guilliman begins to rebuild, not the Imperium of old, but something leaner, smaller, honest. He gathers remnants of loyal forces, not to restore faith but to preserve order. He refuses to be worshipped. When soldiers kneel before him, he commands them to rise. "You need not believe," he says. "You only need to try." He becomes a symbol not of perfection, but perseverance. It is enough for some, not for all. Dorn's fortresses turn into sanctuaries. Refugees from shattered systems find safety within their walls. He never calls them temples, but the people do. They name him the Stone Saint, the man who builds where others destroy. He hates the title, but he cannot deny the quiet gratitude in their eyes. Perhaps meaning he thinks cannot be erased, it only changes shape. Perturabo's designs take root. Across fractured sectors, his decentralized systems allow isolated worlds to survive even as central authority dies. He does not call it empire, he calls it function. Yet when he looks at what he's built, thousands of independent societies linked by mutual need rather than command, he feels something strange, pride without guilt. The first he's ever known, Angron becomes a myth. The daemon of rage turned savior. In the deep wars of the void, entire fleets whisper his name before battle. He fights still, but no longer for vengeance, he fights for the living. Some say he weeps after each victory. None live long enough to know if it's true. Curze fades entirely. Rumors say he walks the webway, lost between realities, muttering that even chaos has grown quiet. Perhaps he found peace in nothingness. Or perhaps his torment simply outlasted existence. Lorgar's doctrine spread slowly but persistently. He calls it the Covenant of Ash. It teaches that humanity's strength lies not in gods or empires, but in the act of facing truth without surrender. His followers rebuild ruins, teach, heal, remember. They paint the Emperor's image not in gold, but in grey, not as a god, but as an old man, eyes open, wary and kind. For the first time, faith becomes something closer to compassion than obedience. Terror itself transforms. The palace stands, but its walls bear no banners. The throne room remains sealed, bathed in dim golden light, guarded by silent custodians who no longer pray but watch. Some say the Emperor's body still glows faintly, that his consciousness lingers in the machine. Others say he is gone and only memory remains. Either way, the priests no longer sing his name. They simply maintain the silence, as though silence itself has become holy. The Imperium, or what remains of it, becomes something else. A network of human worlds bound not by faith, but necessity. Its strength is uneven, fragile, endlessly threatened by chaos and hunger and fear. But it endures, because endurance at last is all humanity has left. Guilliman often dreams of the throne, of his father's final words. Sometimes in those dreams he sees the Emperor not as he was, but as he might have been, a man smiling faintly beneath the weight of galaxies. He wakes from those dreams feeling lighter and older at once. He wasn't perfect, Guilliman once tells Dorn, but he tried. And maybe that's enough. Dorn doesn't answer. He just keeps building. In the far reaches of the galaxy, beyond where the Astronomican's light can reach, small human colonies begin to rise. Some know nothing of the Imperium, they are too young, too far. Others know everything and choose to start over. They write their own histories, unburdened by divine lies. They build statues of the Emperor not in worship, but in remembrance. Monuments not to a god, but to a man who dared to tell the truth at the end. The warp quiets for a time. The chaos gods, robbed of the fervor that fed them, grow restless. Without universal faith to corrupt, their laughter turns brittle. Humanity, fractured yet alive, learns to navigate the void with imperfect eyes and imperfect hearts. The galaxy becomes darker but more honest. In the ruins of a dead cathedral on Terra, Lorgar kneels one last time. Before him stands the empty throne, glowing faintly in the dusk. "You were wrong," he whispers, voice trembling. "But so was I. We mistook belief for truth." He reaches out, touches the base of the machine, cold metal beneath his hand. "If you can hear me, know this: I forgive you. I forgive us all." Outside, the stars are faint, their light slow to reach the world. Humanity will never be what it was. It will never again worship as it once did. But perhaps that is its salvation, that it no longer needs gods to survive. The Emperor's body is dust now, or perhaps energy, or perhaps something between the two. But his final act, the confession, has done what no war or miracle ever could. It forced humanity to look at itself and decide whether to despair or to grow. Most will do both. That is the way of things. The age of gods is over. The age of men, flawed and unafraid, has begun. Centuries pass, and the memory of the confession becomes legend. Not erased, never that, but softened by time, shaped into 1,000 interpretations. Some call it the age of truth, others the fall of divinity. Most simply call it the silence. The Imperium did not die that day. It fractured, burned, adapted, but it lived. The stars are colder now, the light dimmer, yet in that dimness, humanity discovered something the old Imperium never could: the strength of its own small flame. On Terra, the palace remains both tomb and temple. The golden throne no longer hums with endless power, it is quiet, inert, a monument to 10,000 years of fear and faith. The custodians still stand guard, though their duty has changed. They do not protect a god, they protect a story. The last story that mattered enough to save the species from itself. No pilgrim is allowed beyond the outer gates, yet millions still gather each year just to stand in the shadow of the mountain and whisper the same words: he told the truth. Guilliman's new Imperium never truly becomes an empire. It's a latticework of alliances, pragmatic and imperfect. No single creed unites it, but trade and cooperation replace fanaticism. His councils are assemblies of equals, not worshippers. The bureaucracies that once enslaved the species to ritual begin to wither. For every world that falls to anarchy, another finds stability. Not because of decree, but because ordinary people decide that survival matters more than dogma. Guilliman refuses every title offered to him: Emperor, Regent, Savior. He signs his letters simply Robot of Macragge. To his dying day he refuses to be a god. And yet, ironically, myth still finds him. Over generations, stories twist. Some call him the second Dorn. Others say he was the Emperor reborn in humility. Statues rise, not colossal, not gilded, but human-sized, worn by touch. Children trace the grooves of his face and ask, was he real? Their elders answer, real enough. Rogel Dorn's citadels stand long after his bones turn to dust. Some become cities, others sanctuaries. Inside their walls, philosophy replaces scripture in the fortress of echoes. His followers teach that faith and duty are not opposites, that to build is an act of hope, even when one no longer believes. Dorn's name becomes synonymous with endurance itself, though he never sought it. Perturabo's designs outlive them all. His decentralized systems, once considered cold and heartless, become the backbone of the post-imperial age. Worlds function autonomously yet remain connected through shared knowledge, a vast web of cooperation without command. In his final years, Perturabo retreats to a small moon where he watches the stars through a cracked observatory dome. When an apprentice asks if he regrets anything, he says, "Only that I spent so long building walls when I could have built bridges." His structures endure for millennia, the last testament of a mind that learned too late what it meant to care. Angron dies as he lived, in battle, but not in rage. His final stand is not against humans but against something older, something that stirs in the warp when belief fades. A creature born of despair itself, feeding on the psychic vacuum left by the Emperor's death. Angron meets it head-on. Those who witness the clash say he fought without fury, without hatred, only defiance. When it ends, nothing remains of him but silence, and in that silence, for the first time, peace. Curze becomes a rumor told in low voices by those who travel too far into the dark. Some say he guards the edge of reality, keeping worse things from slipping through. Others say he simply dissolved into the void he worshipped. Either way, his shadow remains, a reminder that even monsters can be born from meaning lost. Lorgar's covenant flourishes in quiet corners of the galaxy. His followers reject temples, hierarchies, and icons. They gather around fires and teach children that divinity lives in the struggle to exist without certainty. When asked who their god is, they smile and say, "You are." In time, even the most hardened cynics begin to see that faith, stripped of fear, can heal as much as it once destroyed. The Mechanicus never truly recovers. Mars burns for generations. Out of its ruins rise the technologues, human engineers who no longer worship machines but understand them. They treat technology as partnership, not deity. They rebuild the forgotten sciences the old Imperium had buried beneath ritual. For the first time in 10,000 years, progress returns to humanity, cautious, imperfect, but real. The Inquisition transforms into something unrecognizable. The most zealous factions die out quickly, consumed by their own contradictions. Those who remain evolve into historians, record keepers, guardians of the confession's truth. They become the archivists of the last lie, their only mission to ensure that the truth is never again forgotten, never again rewritten to birth another god. On Terra, the throne room is sealed for the final time. Inside lies only dust and the faintest trace of golden light. But that light never goes out completely. It flickers still, small and stubborn, like the memory of a candle long extinguished. Some scholars claim it's nothing more than residual energy. Others whisper that it's something else, not life, but remembrance. The galaxy grows quiet for a while. The Chaos Gods remain, but their laughter is distant now, their voices thin. Without universal faith to twist, they are starved of power. Humanity's fear once fed them. Now humanity's uncertainty keeps them hungry. They linger in the warp like predators circling a campfire, waiting for the light to die. But the light does not die, it trembles. It flickers, it endures. 1,000 years after the confession, a traveler from a remote colony lands on Terra. The planet is scarred but alive. He walks among the ruins of the old ecclesiarchy, sees children playing where cathedrals once stood, and marvels at how silence has become sacred. When he reaches the edge of the throne room, he leaves behind a single flower, artificial, printed from metal and glass, and says, "Thank you for being honest." No one records his name, but his gesture becomes ritual. Every year travelers bring offerings not to worship, but to remember. And so slowly humanity learns a new language of belief, not in gods or destiny, but in continuation. The stars do not answer their prayers anymore, but they still shine. Ships cross the void by their own power, not divine light. Children grow up hearing not hymns of perfection, but stories of failure and courage. When they speak of the Emperor, they do not call him the god of mankind. They call him the last father. Somewhere in the archives of Terra, an anonymous scribe writes a final line beneath the oldest surviving chronicle: "He lied to save us, and then told the truth to set us free." That line endures, through wars and rebirths, through collapse and rediscovery, through the slow turning of the millennia. It remains, not as scripture, not as prophecy, but as memory. Humanity no longer needs gods, it only needs stories, and this one, above all, refuses to die. Because even in the endless dark, truth has its own kind of light. The galaxy breathes again, not with unity, nor with peace, but with something far older, persistence. The stars burn without prayer now. Humanity no longer looks up to seek salvation, it looks inward. The echoes of the Emperor's confession still ripple through history, shaping every civilization born from its aftermath. No one agrees on what his final words truly meant. Some remember them as absolution, others as betrayal. But all agree on one thing: the moment he spoke, the age of myth ended, and the age of truth began. Terror is no longer the center of the galaxy. Power diffuses, scattering like embers from a dying fire. Worlds once ruled by decree learn to govern themselves. Some thrive, others fall, but each becomes its own experiment in survival. The dream of empire fades, replaced by a patchwork of human societies, each interpreting the Emperor's confession through the lens of their own wounds. To the distant colonies, the Emperor becomes more symbol than memory, a parable whispered by teachers to remind their children that even gods can fail, and that failure is not the end. In the deep void, among derelict ships and forgotten worlds, there are those who still worship, not the Emperor as he was, but the idea of him, not divine but defiant. They call themselves the keepers of the honest flame. They light no incense, offer no prayers. Instead, they repeat the words he spoke: "I have lied to you." They recite them as mantra, not confession, a reminder that truth is not purity but struggle. Their temples are libraries. Their relics are data slates filled with contradictions. They worship doubt as the highest form of faith. Guilliman's successors rule by debate, not decree. Councils rise and fall. Every policy, every reform, carries the shadow of the old Imperium. His legacy is not an empire reborn, but a culture of argument. A civilization that refuses to accept a single truth without question. It is chaotic, exhausting, often violent, but it endures. When his final day comes, Guilliman orders that no monument be built in his name. His ashes are scattered in the void between stars. Yet in time, people begin to gather there anyway, not to worship, but to think. The coordinates of his resting place become known simply as the quiet point. On Mars, the technologues build wonders no one in the old Imperium would have dared. They reawaken ancient machines, not as slaves to ritual, but as partners in design. Great engines orbit the red planet, harvesting its light to power the colonies beyond. The binary prayers of the past evolve into language again, not worship but collaboration. Humanity's children begin to dream of stars beyond even the Emperor's reach. Progress, once heresy, becomes sacred. Lorgar's covenant spreads beyond its founder's lifespan. His sermons, transcribed and reshaped across centuries, become the backbone of a new kind of faith, one without dogma, without hierarchy. They call it the human creed. Its central belief is simple: the divine is not above you. It is what you choose to create. It thrives not because it promises salvation, but because it asks for honesty. The creed teaches that despair is holy, because to despair and still move forward is the truest act of worship. In that paradox, humanity finds balance. Some remnants of the old ecclesiarchy survive in hidden corners. A few still preach the Emperor's godhood, clinging to ritual like drowning men to driftwood. But even they begin to change. In time, even they stop demanding obedience. Their sermons grow quieter, more sorrowful. They speak of forgiveness more than punishment. One ancient preacher, standing before a half-empty cathedral, says to his dwindling flock, "Perhaps faith was never about gods. Perhaps it was always about courage." His words are not remembered by name, but they echo through the centuries. Beyond the edges of known space, the descendants of lost colonies encounter xeno civilizations long thought extinct. Some bring war, others dialogue. Without the unifying arrogance of the old Imperium, humanity learns to coexist, not always peacefully but pragmatically. Trade replaces crusade, curiosity replaces conquest. For the first time in millennia, humanity's identity expands beyond domination. The galaxy does not become kind, but it becomes possible. In the void between stars, strange new phenomena emerge. Warp storms fade and reform, quieter, less violent. The psychic scream of the immaterium softens as belief itself stabilizes. The chaos gods, deprived of the Imperium's fervor, retreat into obscurity. Some scholars claim they are dying. Others say they have simply become smaller, localized, shadows of their former selves. Either way, their influence wanes. Humanity learns to travel the warp with less fear. The navigator's mutations evolve. Their eyes no longer burn with madness, but shimmer with calm understanding. They see the warp not as hell, but as reflection, a vast ocean of collective thought. It is said that one day a navigator looks into the void and sees something impossible. A figure seated upon a throne, not golden but pale as ash. The figure smiles, not godlike, not radiant, but gently. Then it fades. Whether vision or memory, none can say. But it spreads among the navigators like gospel. He is at peace. Time flows, the galaxy changes. But terror endures, solemn and slow. The mountain that once housed the throne becomes a city of scholars. The air hums not with prayer but conversation. Children play where the ecclesiarch once screamed his sermons. And deep within the ruins of the throne room, the last custodian remains. Ancient, immortal, his armor dim, his purpose fulfilled. He has not spoken in centuries. When he finally does, it is to a young archivist cataloguing the chamber's relics. Was he truly a god? She asks. The custodian looks at the empty seat, at the thin line of light still bleeding through its cracks, and replies, "He was something rarer. He was human." The archivist nods, uncertain if she understands. She records his words and leaves. The custodian remains. Some say he eventually kneels. Others say he simply fades with the light. No one knows. But the throne remains empty, and somehow that emptiness feels right. The descendants of the Primarchs continue to shape the species in quieter ways. Guilliman's line becomes the stewards of governance and law. Dorn's builders craft fortresses that double as cities of learning. Perturabo's students expand his work into interstellar engineering, building bridges across space rather than walls within it. Angron's name becomes a symbol of rebellion against oppression, invoked by the downtrodden as both curse and prayer. And Lorgar's followers, scattered across thousands of worlds, become teachers, philosophers, and healers. Their legacies intertwine, forming something new, not a legion, not an imperium, but a civilization bound by choice. Humanity learns to thrive not because of divine command, but because it has finally accepted its own contradictions. Still, the old wounds remain. Some worlds relapse into tyranny, some rediscover cruelty. Some begin to whisper of gods once more. History, like the warp, repeats in eddies and echoes. But even those who choose darkness do so knowing it is a choice. And that knowledge, in its own way, is salvation. 1,000 years after the Emperor's death, a philosopher on a distant colony writes, "Perhaps the Emperor's greatest sin was not that he lied, but that he believed lies could save us. And perhaps his greatest redemption was realizing truth could set us free, even if it killed him." The line spreads. It becomes the new creed carved above doorways, whispered before sleep, etched onto ship hulls that cross the void. Truth before comfort. No one calls it religion, but everyone lives by it in some small way. When new empires rise, for they always do, they rise on transparency, not worship. Their leaders are questioned, challenged, doubted. Some fall, some endure. But never again does a single name bind all humanity beneath it. The species, scattered yet connected, learns to live without gods, and in doing so it becomes something closer to divine than it ever was beneath one. The galaxy remains dangerous, filled with Xenos threats, rogue psychers, and the quiet whisper of the warp. Yet in every shadow there is light, not blinding, not pure, but human. In the faces of scientists and laborers, of children building ships from scavenged metal, of poets writing hymns to imperfection. That is where the Emperor's final gift lives on. It is not salvation, it is not order, it is choice. The galaxy is older now. Empires rise and fall like tides against black sand. Planets bloom and die, humanity survives them all. No golden light guides the void anymore. Yet still, ships drift between stars, carrying stories instead of orders. The age of worship has ended, but memory remains. Memory written not in scripture, but in the bones of a species that once mistook its fear for faith. Terror is no longer the heart of an empire. It is a scar, a relic, a monument to what once was, and what was learned. The great cities have become gardens of steel and stone. The air hums with quiet invention. The people who walk its streets no longer bow to statues. They look each other in the eye. They know the name Emperor, but they speak it with the tone one reserves for a myth. Part warning, part gratitude. They do not worship, they remember. Somewhere beneath the rebuilt palace, in a chamber sealed long ago, the last remnants of the throne hum faintly. Not with power, but with memory. Gold turned dull, circuits corroded. But within the silence there is a rhythm, faint, almost imperceptible. Not life, not divinity. Just the echo of breath once drawn, of truth once spoken. Scholars argue whether it is real or merely imagination. But sometimes, when the storms of terror rage and the lightning strikes the mountain, they swear the hum grows stronger, as if the planet itself refuses to forget. The new Imperium, if it can even be called that, is nothing like the old. There are no saints, no inquisitors, no legions of worship. There are architects, engineers, philosophers, and dreamers. Humanity has become a civilization of thinkers, fragile, divided, but honest. There is no throne at its center, no god above it. Only the endless effort to understand. They build great archives where the old cathedrals stood, their vaults filled not with relics, but with data, history unedited, truth unpolished. The first line in every archive reads the same: remember what we were, so we never become it again. On the edges of known space, explorers discover remnants of the past. Derelict warships drifting through void, abandoned temples carved into asteroids, fragments of the old Mechanicus, still reciting broken prayers to machines that no longer respond. Sometimes they find statues of the Emperor, towering, majestic, worn smooth by time. They never destroy them. They let them stand half-buried and broken, reminders that even gods erode. The Chaos gods linger still, though weaker, thinner. They whisper to those who still hunger for power, those who still crave certainty. But their whispers are faint now, competing against the new noise of humanity's awakening. For every world that falls to madness, 10 rise again. For every zealot who builds a new altar, 1,000 others refuse to kneel. The warp has not vanished. It never will, but it no longer owns humanity's soul. It watches, hungry, patient, knowing that mortals are never free of folly forever. Yet even the warp seems to hum differently now, quieter, less sure of itself. There are still wars. There always will be. Humanity is not saved. It never will be. But it endures, and that endurance has become sacred in itself. A faith of survival. A creed of imperfection. They build ships not to conquer, but to connect. They fight not for God, but for each other. The galaxy remains cruel, but humanity's cruelty is tempered now by reflection. by the knowledge of what worship once cost them. And through it all, the emperor's confession becomes myth. Scholars debate whether it even happened. Some say the voice that spoke was the emperor's final breath distorted by dying machinery. Others insist it was a miracle, the only true one. But myth or memory, it endures because it needs to. Every civilization that rises after inherits its echo, shaping it into whatever truth it requires. One story says that, in the moment of his death, the emperor saw beyond the warp, beyond gods, beyond reality, and realized that creation itself was built on the same fragile principle as humanity, the will to continue. They say his last thought was not fear, not regret, but wonder. That, in his final instant, he finally understood that perfection was never the point, that the true divinity of mankind was not in power, but persistence. Another story claims that his consciousness still drifts through the psychic tides, scattered like dust among the stars. That sometimes, when a dying world flickers with one last spark of defiance, when a lone soldier refuses to yield in the face of extinction, when a child on a forgotten colony whispers to the dark, "We're still here," something answers, not in words but in warmth, as if the universe itself nods in quiet approval. No one knows which is true. Perhaps both are, perhaps neither. But the uncertainty no longer frightens humanity. It defines them. They have learned to live within it, to draw strength from doubt instead of fleeing from it. The old Imperium sought meaning in absolute truth. The new humanity finds it in the search itself. 1,000 generations after the emperor's fall, a poet writes, "He gave us nothing but honesty, and it was enough." The line becomes the closing verse of a song sung across the stars, passed between worlds that barely remember who wrote it. In time the words change, evolve, soften. He was human, so are we. That is our salvation. And so the story ends as it began, with a man. Not a god, not a legend, not a flawless savior. Just a man who tried to guide his species and failed, then told them the truth, and in doing so, gave them freedom. His empire crumbled, his faith shattered, but his honesty endured. The galaxy remains vast, dark and cruel. But within that darkness, a billion small lights burn, ships, cities, minds, none eternal, all fragile. Yet together, they form a constellation that even the warp cannot swallow. The emperor once ruled through fear. Now he rules through memory, not as master but as lesson. In the silent chamber beneath terror's crust, where the throne's last echo hums faintly, the dust stirs. Perhaps it is only vibration from the storms above. Perhaps not. But if one listens closely, if one stands in that tomb of gold and failure and listens, it almost sounds like breathing. And if it is, perhaps it is not his. Perhaps it is ours. The age of gods is over, the age of men has begun.